I'm joined now by a development economist in the person of Professor Ken Ife. Thank you, Prof, for coming on Business Daily this morning.
Thank you for having me.
Prof, you've heard from Nigerians, you've seen the opinions that Nigerians hold considering the recently released NBS report. But let us hear from you now, Prof. How can we start by explaining the disconnect between, the macroeconomic data and the current economic realities of Nigerians?
Quite often, the economic conditions you are referring to is not really the GDP that reflects that as much as inflation figures. But I do hear very often that this growth is on paper and it doesn't really connect to food on the table. But I think on this particular growth that we are looking at today is actually about food, because crop production produced almost over 40% of the growth that you saw. So we will talk about maybe 20%, 20.35% of that growth came actually from crop production. And crop production gave us a substantive growth that actually pushed the 0.8% agricultural growth rate in the first quarter GDP to just about 2.1%, so 1.41%. So that's a significant move. But that notwithstanding, the devil is also in the detail when we discuss the rest of the detail.
Yeah, we will go to look at, the specific sector performance shortly. But generally speaking, what do you make of the recently released GDP report?
Now, what I would say is that is a decent growth at 3.17%. Is a decent growth, but that growth is very, very weak. Is weak, first of all. Secondly, is seasonal, and thirdly, is not something you can bank on if you're going to project on tomorrow's GDP in the next third and fourth quarter. But let me unpack it. When I say it's seasonal, we are in a period. We have a seasonal variation in a GDP growth. This is the point where you have the highest GDP growth, where food is coming out when you are having harvest. So that's why you see crop production push the figures up. But next quarter, touch wood, it might drop, because if you look at the whole trend, that is the next quarter, third quarter is when it hits the ground. But the second point about when I say that it's not enough growth, because the 1.21% growth of agriculture is far too low compared to population growth rate, which is about 3%. And the urbanization growth rate, which is 4.6%. So you can still see that we still have severe challenges on food security in the country. So it is not going to go away, definitely not by what we are doing right now. But we don't know what else is coming. But I think one of the things that might actually come, if you look at it, is that I just went to Southeast last week to look at thousands of hectares of maize. They're all gone because for 1 month there was no rain. So now that rain is coming, let's hope that some of them may survive. But that points to poor harvest coming from that area. Then also you have flood taking over 3 states now, and it's going to go to about 6 or more states. And that flood floods the food plain, the flood plains, all the crops, rice, maize, any staple crop will be decimated. So that's going to be a pointer to adverse harvest in the future. So you can see those things coming together and likely to push back on the growth that we have seen on the agricultural sector.
Well said, Prof, especially, talking about what we just might be seeing in the agri space here in Nigeria. But let us go on a short break. When we return, the conversation continues, and Professor Ken Ife, who is a development economist, is still on standby to stay. And you're still watching Business Daily, coming to you live on Trust TV. And just before the break, we started a conversation where we, started discussion on the recently released GDP data by the National Bureau of Statistics. And according to the NBS, Nigeria's GDP grew by 3.19% in the second quarter, an increase from 2.98%, which was recorded in the first quarter of the year. And I still have my guest with me, who is a development economist economist, Professor Ken Ife. Thank you, Prof, again for coming on the program.
Thank you for having me.
Okay, Prof, just before the break, you started to talk, regarding the performance of the agri sector, and something you said stood out for me. You said you expected for this growth to be seasonal, due to, current realities in the agri sector. But I'd like for us to touch on the services sector dominance, which, the services sector was the major contributor to the GDP data, which contributed about 58.76%. Tremendous performance there, I should say, by the services sector. But do you also share in the same sentiment regarding the seasonal performance of the agri sector? Would you say that this is the same with the services sector? And should we expect for this to be sustained, talking about the growth that has been recorded?
No, the growth of the service sector has always been above par, so they've been doing quite well. And there are strong components of the service sector that makes it do what it does. One is the financial and insurance services. That gives about 27% growth rate. Last quarter, it was about 31% growth rate, although its contribution to GDP is around about 5-point-something%. But ICT is the big boy here, because that is is about 19% now, over 19% of our GDP. It used to be around 15, 16, but it's grown to up to 19% now, and delivers some decent rates of about 4.44%. It used to be higher, much higher, but it just returned only 4.44% this time round. Then you have trade. Trade also has the same amount of contribution to the GDP of about around the same 16%. The trade, but trade also has a much lower growth rate, because you see what is going on. Currency is also a big problem for them, and then you've seen all the local trade as well, affected by transportation networks and costs and all kinds of costs coming down on the trade sector.
I will like to, continue the thoughts from what you stated regarding the trade sector and looking at the business environment in Nigeria. A lot, like you rightly stated, has happened lately. But let us hear from you. How would you appraise the current business environment as we speak?
Very tough. Nigeria has always been known to have a restrictive trading environment, and then also, not playing its role, because we're always in the last quartile of all socioeconomic indicators, global competitiveness, ease of doing business, logistic performance index, global enabling trade index, corruption perception index. All these indices were in the last quartile globally, when you look at 195 nations and all of that. And the situation is just the same. In the ease of doing business, we're still having to find how the states can reduce those key parameters about the setting up business, and then how long it takes to give grant construction payment for people to invest, and then how long it takes you to litigate on title, 1 to 2 years. All of these issues are still daunting, and they're holding us down. And you go to the seaports and the airports, you look at the enabling trade index and trade performance index, it's the same thing. It takes you up to 2 weeks to clear a container. And then you look at our competitors. Ghana cost them $7,000 to export 100 tons of cocoa. In Nigeria, it costs $40,000. I mean, it's all over the place. So that's why people are voting with their feet. Traders go to Cotonou to go and clear their goods and then smuggle them in. We don't get the custom duties because they're smuggling them in. You have 400,000 second-hand cars coming through Cotonou to Nigeria, when if you go to the Rolo port in Lagos, only about 200,000 cars come in. But look at twice that number is coming through the borders and all that. People are just saying, we can't afford to pay for 2 weeks to clear our goods. You go there, you do it in 24 hours, and then they don't care. They pay them the duty, they drive it in through the porous border. So, we just have to, we are hurting ourselves. WTO and World Bank, they looked at the facilitation, and they consider that 10 to 15% of the total volume, trade volume, is lost to trade facilitation. Now, our total trade volume is about $120 billion in and out. And so about $15 billion is lost because of lack of trade facilitation. So who bears this cost is the private sector. And what do? They pass it on to the public. So who is gaining?
Unfortunate. But yeah, when I was going through the newspapers this morning, I did see one of the headlines that, talked about how the Presidential Ease of Doing Business Committee had scored, some government agencies poorly, the Bank of Industry and some other agencies. What would you say should be done differently? You've talked regarding, trade facilitation and where Nigeria currently stands in comparison with countries such as Ghana and Benin Republic. What immediate measures would you recommend, that should be changed immediately?
They're interconnected. There are about 10 of them. You have the ease of registration, and then you have ease of giving you title to your document, to your land.
That is from the CAC now.
Yeah, no. CAC is registration of business.
Okay.
But states have their own registration apart from CAC. All that small business. Then you have the construction permit. I want to build. I want to invest. Give me construction permit. Give me approve my land. They hold it for 500 days, 600 days. Why would it be that? Then in UK, the prime minister put a deadline. You must approve within 6 weeks. Otherwise, it's assumed to have been approved. Mrs. Thatcher when she was there. And then you have other things like the legal, how long it takes you to settle dispute on title. That takes 2 years, on top 1 year, 3 years. Then you could even be 4 years. Then you also have a border, the ease of exporting something and the ease of importing something. And they're looking at how many processes do you have to go through, procedures, how long does it take, and what does it cost? All three cases for both in and out is the problem. Then you look at multiple taxation. You've got that many taxes as you move from one state to another one. All kinds of tax will hit you as you go along. So you have so many of those, and even the small business protection. That is a minority shareholder. What protection does it have in your legal framework? It's all in there. There are about 10 of them. All of them impact, interactively on however we are scored. And businesses experience all this. They are not necessary. You can still streamline this tax, and then at the back end, you know how you share the money. So why throw them, spanner? And each time you stop somebody, you add cost, and then not to talk of power. Even how long it takes you to get power connection is one of them. And how long it takes you to get telephone connection, landline, is one of them. I don't even know who gets landline these days. But it is in there. They're using it to judge us. So all of those impact on the thing.
Very intense description there, talking about all of these challenges that businesses are facing here in Nigeria. But let us touch on, the elephant in the room, that is the oil sector. We did see, the sector grow by about 10% in the last quarter. And that was, some recovery from the performance of the sector in the previous quarter. But I will like for you to speak regarding that now. How would you interpret the performance of the oil sector specifically, especially since it is Nigeria's major
I call that spurious growth. Spurious growth, because apart from the seasonal, which we know and we can predict, there is spurious growth that comes from oil. Today is minus 27%, tomorrow is 5.7%. Now, this one is 10.17%. Last quarter was 5.7%. But in any case, the contribution of the oil to the GDP is only about 5.7%. So it's not that much. But it's not something that you can bank on, because you don't know what will happen tomorrow. The militants may strike, they could burst some pipes, all kinds of things can happen, and the volume goes down.
Speaking of, the ability of us not being able to bank on the performance within the oil sector, like you said, so much uncertainty regarding oil production and all of those. But what strategies can Nigeria, implement at this point to ensure that our production levels are, not potentially hampered upon moving forward?
Well, I think, first of all, you have to deal with the issue of militancy and all the busting of the pipes and all kinds of leakages going on. But you also have to invest. There has to invest. See, what happens is that the offshore and onshore, they all have different promises. The onshore, the more you have to invest on prospecting. Because if you don't invest in prospecting and the exploration, then how do you get the cost of drilling continues to go up and up and up, until you discover new wells where it is cheaper to drill. So we got to be investing. Although I know that we have investment from the PIA, a huge money going into the some other investment in the mainland, but some of that can come back to help continue to invest in the onshore and offshore resources. We have a lot of gas and oil, but you must be investing as well as there is less militancy in the area of offshore. So perhaps we can also go for some of more prolific deep offshore oil and gas. So that's another way, but very expensive though to do that. And then also we should deploy floating FLNG. And we have several proposals from Germany, from South Korea. There are some proposals to do huge of floating LNG in the sea. So that is also another way to quickly ramp up. But I have to also mention that solid minerals is coming up, because they've got about 7%, over 7% growth rate there, though it's from a very small base, because the base is only about 0.3% of our GDP. But nevertheless, it's a good sign, because we've had that sign. Last quarter was good, and now it's still maintained a growth of 7.7%. So that has to, whatever they are doing that is making growth come there, they should do it and double it and triple it so that there could be more growth. Because I keep saying to ministers, especially the economic planning, I said, you have, when you look at our fiscal strategy, you only have one benchmark that is relevant economically, which is the production volume, the crude production volume. What about other ones? Why don't you have a composite solid mineral index that we could keep on focusing on? So you just choose about 5 of the most relevant ones, and then work out an index on them, and then keep pushing. I want to see growth on this, so that they could push the solid mineral industry. And so we can have another benchmark on that, and then come to the transactions between ICT and banking. You know that the proxy for the two is the number of transactions that you do. So now put transaction volume in the benchmark. So that now makes the banks go more, ICT, they all go more in increasing that, because you are taxing that and you are getting revenue. You understand? So you now have 3 benchmarks in your fiscal strategy paper. And plan on them and then push them.
But you talked about 5 solid minerals that could be.
No, there are 44.
Yeah,
but you just find about lithium, about gold, and the ones that we have the highest market on. And then we do them and then increase. Put investors and the solid mineral ministry to work hard to increase their target, and they will be budgeted on those, and they'll work on those, and then they'll be doing conferences, doing everything to spur investors to come into that field, because they're driven by target. Well then you reward them.
Well said, Prof. But I would like for us to, touch on policy interventions that could be directed towards the extractive industry, the solid mineral industry. Because one thing that has come up over and over again is, illegal mining in areas such as Nasarawa, Zamfara, Taraba, and the likes. So what are you seeing enough being done in, policy direction or policy intervention within that area?
No, I think I'd rather grow the future than fight about the past and all this artisanal, this, that. If you have artisanal miners, they're only indicative of the fact that you have not organized this industry and you have not encouraged big boys to enter into the industry. And so they're helping themselves. How can people die? And when they have minerals sitting on top of minerals, they have to eat something.
Okay, so let's talk about.
So you have to organize. Solutions. You have to organize the artisanal, have a structural framework, and then a plan that enables them, and then cluster them. And then build infrastructure around clusters, not about individuals. Public infrastructure doesn't look for individuals. You look at clusters and sectors. So you focus them so that you can build capacity and then regulate, bring them under regulation. You do the same with the oil as well, because you see you go on blowing the artisanal refiners. I mean, they are causing more hard work to the environment anyway, but you can still organize that sector so that you can bring them under regulation. And then if you have to have a strategic reserve where crude can go to, and then they could access crude, and then it's just even modular refineries, and then you can give them crude. America has huge reserves, Saudi Arabia has huge reserves. You create our own reserves, and then get crude pumped into there, and then they can access them under regulation, so that you can see them grow, and rather than the way it's going. It's a madhouse right now.
It is indeed a madhouse. But Prof, as our time is, running fast, I would like to hear your thoughts on your projections for, the fourth quarter, or the third quarter, I beg your pardon, of the year. What are your projections, especially for the agri sector, oil sector, and non-oil sectors?
Well, the oil sector might still keep up. It might still keep up to that 10%, between 7 and 10%. But as I said, it is dampened by the fact it's only 5.7% of the contribution to the GDP. The agriculture one will not rise significantly because at the moment, although we are harvesting, but we are in the next 1 month, we are going to see what is going to happen. We're not going to have enough maize because of what I just described, over 1 month of drought. And then you'd have all these rivers overflowing now, and then more states are going to be affected before the end of the next 2 weeks. Many more states, Lokoja will come in, all the other states will come in. 3 are already overrun. So that means that there's going to be significant drop in food crops coming in. But the minister has a lot of strategy right now, and I'm working with her on him on that, on agricultural strategy to get more food on the table. So we're doing lots of stuff now, but still will not provide the kind of growth you recorded now. So, touch wood, this may not be 2.17, but 1.47, maybe it will still be much less than 2% for the next one. That is because seasonally it's supposed to go down. It's actually going down. But don't forget again that even when the crops, we are conjuring the crops, there's going to be imported food licensed for 6 months. So food is going to come. And then how is that going to play in GDP? You're going to see it reflect on aggregate demand and aggregate supply. So you have that go up. So that will now mask the shortage of food from harvest. Do you understand? So you might see the thing go up. It's going up not because we are producing more, but because we imported. And then the demand is rising because there's more food coming in. And the transactions because there's more money being paid. So GDP will pick those up. But the reality is that these food are not really from our harvest. Do you understand what I'm saying? So you might get a much higher growth rate, but not because you grew more food.
But I really want to continue your thoughts, on the current state of Nigeria's agri sector and the food crisis that has been said to, been existing for a while now. There has been talks around, potential variations in food and production across the nation. But how should we address the disparities that we are currently experiencing across, different sectors or regions in the nation, especially in the area of food production?
Yeah, we are endowed differently, although there are some crops that have universal application, like cassava, for example. About 30 states are doing well in cassava. It's all over the place. Everywhere can grow that. So I'm working with the minister on cassava. He said to me, come and flood this country with cassava gari because people just want gari. And that's the cheapest thing that they can lay hands on, so we are working on that. But then there are some regions that, especially in the frontier regions in the north, we have a lot more grains there. But we also have big challenge. The 100 million francophone citizens surrounding Nigeria are all around that area, and they are buying our food because our currency is very, very cheap, the devaluation. So it's like 80% devalued compared to the franc CFA. So our food is very cheap. And there's nothing you can do to stop them because the ECOWAS Treaty protects them under the free movement of goods and services. So unless you do value addition to raise the value of the goods, and then you have to ask them to pay tax. So all of that constraint. So you see that as a challenge for us. And the transport costs ought to come down. If it comes down, it helps food supply coming down here. This is because when you look at inflation corridor, the high inflation corridor is Lagos, what they call Akaji corridor. Lagos, Ibadan, Kaduna, Kano, up there to Jinbiwa. Now that's because of high transportation costs. So you have imported goods coming in, carrying high competition costs, and then you have goods produced up north in the frontier states coming down, incurring high transportation costs, and the melting point is Kwara, Kogi. That's where you have the highest inflation, if you look at the state inflation figures. But with imported food coming in now without duty, that may change a bit because that food coming in is going to be a lot cheaper because the duty has been removed from it. And if petrol comes down with Dangote petrol coming and NNPC petrol coming, then transportation costs will ease and those will become more available. But that can also affect the ones coming down from the north. So these are if,
I mean, so much to look forward to, like the many ifs that you have mentioned, from Dangote refinery to hopefully the transportation costs drop. And also, okay, let us talk about inflation. We did see inflation slow down in the past month to about 33.40%. What are your projections for
the inflation
month of
came
August?
down, again, seasonal factor, because you saw the food coming in. this is the peak of harvest. So for the first time, for the last many years now, food sub-basket index has been cruising as 5% to 7% differential, up to 40% plus. But because of the food coming in, it came down a little bit. And that was what translated the heavier drop in that inflation was just accounted mainly by the food that shifted very little. But it might continue to shift if that food comes in from import, the free thing comes in from import. So we might see the next inflation still come down again with the food coming in, more food coming from harvest and then some being imported, and they will diminish the importance of the flood and the lack of poor harvest in some zones. So you may still see it coming down, but not going to be seismic shift in the drop. And that is the only driver that is driving that inflation down. The transport ones is still high, power is still high, many other indices are still high. The urban inflation is still there because it's the theater of inflation. The rural inflation is subdued, and then you have the core inflation, which includes imported food items, processed food. And then you have headline inflation, which is the CPI, that is the one that you are measuring. But food inflation is much, much higher. And that's the one we need to signal to come down. And it's also influenced by what happens at the frontier. The people buying our food in the front, the non-Nigerians, that's called the Francophone, they're buying the food. We can't stop them because it's cheap.
Prof, I will want to hear your thoughts. I've had conversations with farmers who have come on the program and said that at this point, they don't think that importation of food is, a permanent solution, a sustainable solution. We've also heard from people such as the president of the African Development Bank in the person of Akinwumi Adesina, where he did say that he was also, when he spoke against food importation, but let us hear from you now, from the lens of a development economist. Is that a right step in the right direction?
First of all, it's a temporary measure. It's only 6 months. Two, you have to realize that food security is an existential challenge. People are dying because of food. So you can't bring the policy here. Whatever people have to do to bring food on the table, that has to be done to secure lives. It's like COVID. You're telling me, oh, COVID-19 is here, don't buy vaccine because vaccine is going to do this. If vaccine is going to stop death, bring vaccine, then we'll talk about the rest later. Do you understand? So it is about emergency. And when you have a state of emergency, you don't have all these arguments because you have waived your right to do all these arguments, this and that, go to the national assembly. No, it's emergency because it's an existential challenge. Get the food in, only for 6 months. But what I keep saying is, instead of bringing rice here to eat, bring paddy. Paddy is unprocessed, and then our manufacturing capacity and mills here can mill them and keep the jobs here, and they give us cheaper rice. So that's fine. So it's about how we tune those, and I don't think there's anything wrong with that. It's a temporary measure. And the thing is this, inflation is more important than any other variable in macroeconomy, because inflation is the biggest item that drives millions, tens and hundreds of millions of people into poverty. So you have to fight that. And if the way you can fight it is to bring some food in, you have to do that to bring down inflation. If you don't do it, then the 70,000 you're giving to people, which is meaningless to them. They're going to ask for 200,000. They're coming back. So that's the argument.
Okay, Prof, just before we go, I would like to hear your inflation projection, at least for the month of August. It
will come down. It will come down a little bit.
But you don't want to be too specific by calling numbers.
It's a difficult one. It will come down. Not, I can't give you 2%. No, it's not possible. It will be around 1%. It's not. It's a big project, is a work in progress.
Thank you, Professor Ken Ife, who has been speaking very insightfully on the recently released GDP data and, the contributing factors as well as the different sectoral performances. Thank you, Prof, for all the insight you've shared with us today on the program.
Thank you very much for having me.
This is where we draw the curtains on today's edition of Business Daily, but continue the conversation with us on social media. Let us hear your thoughts on the discussed for today. My name is Chiamaka Enendu. Thank you for watching and bye for now.